Brilliant. Welcome, everybody. I'm just going to open up the participants window. If everyone can just pop into the chat, say hello, where you're from, just so we know who's in the room and why you're here. Always nice to get people warmed up and welcoming. We'll be kicking off in the content in a couple of minutes. Once people are in the room, just going to let everyone join in. And big thanks to Matt Lewis as well for joining us this afternoon to provide a bit of content and a bit of storytelling, which we'll come to very shortly. Let me just check to make sure everything's here. One of these days we'll find a smooth way to open up these webinars, but not quite today. Just everyone loads in. Brilliant. Let me get my screens in the right order. So welcome everybody to the final, the webinar number 5 of the Step Up to Net Zero or Steps to Net Zero program from Just Enterprise, where really we're trying to explore what net zero looks like and the practical implications for organisations across Scotland. So always welcome and willing to hear your thoughts, feedback, any challenges you've got. Really helps us understand this. So difficult questions into the chat, please. Always nice to have that from my point of view to try and get some experience going. My name's Adam Bastock. I'm the founder of Small 99. I've been running these 5 webinars now. The rest are available to watch online. So if you are coming to this as your first one, do not worry. We've got 4 other webinars for you to catch up on. At Small 99, we've been helping out a lot with the Growing Climate Confident program to get this net zero program together. So far we have covered engagement, travel, waste and reuse, energy and buildings, and then finally what we're going to be looking at today is supply chains and buying and selling. So quite a big topic to tackle. It's going to be a really interesting session, and we might be coming to breakout rooms later on to hear of your experiences. So please do, as I mentioned, put any questions you've got into the chat or any experiences you've got into the chat. It's always helpful for us to hear from you guys. Just a bit of housekeeping. So closed captions are enabled. If you'd like to use them, there'll be a setting somewhere on Zoom for you to do that. Please do put any questions as the chat has mentioned. The slides and any answers to these questions will be coming out to you in the next few days. And as mentioned, the recordings are available and will be coming out to you as well. And they're all online. So if you want to catch up, that is more than possible to do so. Just a bit about where this is coming from, the Growing Climate Confident kind of website. So that's a resource that's been built up over the past probably a year, 18 months now, and it's been a really fantastic resource where it's pooling all of the knowledge of the sector into one easy to use place. There's some great tools on there, including the scorecard, where you can get a really quick and easy assessment of what your organization is doing and potentially not go and check that out. And there should be a link going into the chat soon. In terms of today and what the agenda is for the next hour or so, really, I wanted to tackle potentially an elephant in the room of what do supply chains have to do with net zero? I think net zero often and quite rightly gets caught up in things like energy and how you can save money, but it is a lot bigger than that. We wanted to explore some of the ways in which this might be impacting on the sector and give you some practical insights into what you can do about it. I'm also going to give a bit of an example of some corporate pressures that I'm seeing. I work a lot with the private sector and small businesses. And I think there's a lot more going on that people realise. Governments are not necessarily leading this. There is a lot of pressure that's coming down the line. So I want to do a little bit of future gazing and just glimpse into what that looks like. And we'll then do some reflections on industry insights that we're hearing from from that scorecard and what we're hearing from across the sector. And then we'll hand over to Matt from Circular Communities, sorry, not Circular Economy. I always end up defaulting to that phrase. Apologies. Yeah, to Circular Communities to talk through their experiences. So do you want to say hello, Matt, quickly?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Adam, for the invitation. Looking forward to speak to Hope.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So yeah, we'll hear from Matt very shortly, and then there'll be a bit of time for some Q&A towards the end. So please do put any questions into the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that, and we'll try and gather those up and ask them at the end, or it might be we ask you to come off mute and speak those if you'd like to. So without further ado, wanted to get stuck in really as to what buying and selling looks like and why we're here and what that really means as a phrase. One of the common things that I get slightly frustrated with doing sustainability talks is that people often think of net zero as recycling, as things like paper straws or going paper free, where in the reality is that sustainability is in the word, right? It is the ability of you to sustain yourself as an organization, and therefore we want to go beyond just looking at the impacts of things like energy and looking into more things of how we are buying and selling everything we're doing. It's really what's the word? Every action you are taking has an impact on this, and I think we need to be really mindful of that. So the ability of your organization to sustain itself is a really key way of rephrasing net zero and sustainability to understand how it's going to impact your organization. And this is a graphic that we put together that within a business or within an organization, there's typically these 5 columns that underpin it. You've got your finance, you've got your marketing, you've got your operations, there's your recruitment, there's your technology. And then sustainability comes along as this sort of sixth pillar that people are trying to fit in somewhere, and it doesn't really fit in anywhere because they're thinking about it in slightly the wrong way. The reality is that sustainability is what it underpins all of the 5 key operations of your organization, and buy and sell is a really great example of how everything that you're buying and selling impacts your finance. It's your things that you're marketing and that you're potentially selling. It's the operations and things you're moving around. It also underpins everything else. So don't think of sustainability just as this sixth pillar that you need to try and fit in. This journey is something that is going to need to impact every part of your organization. If we look at some of the consumer trends here around what's going on at a kind of an industry level, there's a report from an organization called Futera a couple of years ago now, where 73% of corporate experts were saying that consumers are interested in transparency around the products that they're purchasing. 70% of consumers agreed that they were basically saying they also are interested in hearing about the sustainability impacts of products they're buying, which is a great matching there in that the corporates understand that we need to have transparency around the things that they are selling, and consumers need transparency around the things they are buying. The problem is more of the corporate experts were saying that they were satisfied with the transparency that they were offering, whereas only 40% of consumers agreed that they had the transparency over the things that they were buying. And therefore, there is this disconnect between transparency and communication around sustainability and understanding what this actually means. On the Climate Confident website, there is some great resources around case studies, which I think are a great example of how to start tackling this. Some simple case studies are a great way to break down these barriers and get stuck into being able to communicate transparently. The really interesting thing part of this report was that they asked basically, do you trust a brand more or less if they admit to doing bad things? So if you look at someone like Tony Chocolonely, which is a great chocolate bar, which I'm now basically addicted to, they actually admitted finding kind of child slavery in their supply chain a couple of years ago, and they did a big PR release about it and understanding why that was the case and where that came from. They saw a lot of kind of brand loyalty from that as a result, because, well, if they're admitting it, what about everyone else who isn't admitting it? And that's where this trust comes from. So we actually see that people, both millennials and Gen Z, do trust the same or more if you admit to doing bad things within the supply chain or as an organization. So again, just being aware of your own failings or kind of frustrations or challenges, I think, is really key here, and being honest and open about that. You can't control everything. And we'll look at some examples of that later, but just understanding where your limits lie, your abilities lie, is a really key way to attract more kind of consumers or customers. So the key really is that the reason why we're talking about buy and sell today is that every decision is a sustainability decision, and net zero links into that. You are already making these decisions. And I think this is the most powerful thing that you need to take away, really, is that the ability of your organization to adapt and meet net zero, which is quite an ambitious standard, is going to be through how you respond and adapting the existing decisions that you make within that organization to that. Everything has a carbon footprint. We know that it's really hard to go completely kind of net zero immediately, but understanding how the existing decisions you're making and the behaviors you have can change and adapt is a really key way to meet those net zero goals. Just very briefly to go back to what net zero is, wanted just to mention that, because I think we did that in the first webinar. It's probably good to do a little bit of a refresher here. So net zero is essentially 3 different scopes. You've got your scope 1, which is anything your organization is burning. There's this thing, your scope 2 is any electricity you're buying. and scope 3 is basically everything else. So if you think of this delivery chap here, it's how he gets to the door. Is it on a bike? Is it in a van? What's in the box that they're selling? What's the box made of? What's the person that's buying? So it really is quite all encompassing, and that scope 3 can be very overwhelming because it is all of these different parts. If we look at scope 3 in terms of the indirect elements just here from a technical point of view, we see transportation and distribution, the processing of sold goods, the use of sold products, the end of life treatment of sold products, and any leased assets. I won't go into franchises and investments because they're very, very technical, but those first four, it's not necessarily about quantifying the exact carbon emissions related to those. The point here is the things that you might be selling and the operations that you are doing are part of your carbon footprint. There is a framework here that will, in the future, will require small businesses to start reporting on this and start understanding this much more greatly, and therefore thinking about how the organization is influencing and impacting on the environment and net zero through those operations is really key to get ahead of the game. So if you are here and you are thinking about it, you are already one of the leaders in the space. Regulation is coming. It is coming and it's quite fragmented, and it's not coming from one direction, unfortunately. And I would say to emphasize here, this is not necessarily your responsibility to reduce. You cannot control maybe your landlord. You cannot physically control them to change to a renewable energy supplier, but you can be aware of your limitations there and communicate that in an open, honest, and transparent way to say, well, we can't do this because. That for me is much more powerful than saying nothing. And I think that's what we see with that Futura report as well, with individuals individual consumers, responding very well to that transparency piece. Just some examples of this to make it a little bit more tangible. Pukka teas, so the fancy tea bags that are all the herbal teas, they've got a really good carbon footprint report, which I'll go and have a look. They've got like a couple of impact reports where they identified 36% of their footprint was in customers boiling the kettle. So that if you look back to this, that use of sold products, well, they're selling tea bags, people using tea bags. That's a huge part of their footprint potentially is around that piece of their customers boiling kettles and perhaps overfilling them. Now, the point here is that they've actually taken it out of their footprint because they couldn't directly control it, but they did list out the things that they were doing to try and influence people with the things that they were selling. So things like boil-only guidance on each tea envelope, social media campaigns around the use of water and being responsible with that, partnering with different organizations to develop smart boil campaigns for tea drinkers to reduce down that footprint, engaging with renewable energy providers as well to try and understand how they can do that, as well as nature-based kind of projects around tea growing. So I think there's this position of they were aware of their carbon footprint from people using their products. They weren't able to completely control that, but they were responsible for it in some way and were able to act accordingly. So quite a useful example, I find. Another example is Innocent Drinks. They've got a great example here and a great graphic, which I really like, showing the carbon footprint of a bottle of orange juice. Well, here's the breakdown of it. So 24% is in the ingredient production, 27% in the transport of the ingredients. Packaging materials is about 18%. 2% is in the actual blending and the processing of it. I can't see the rest because I'm zooming things out. 15% is in that goods transport, and then 14% in retail logistics. So you start to see here we've got 27%, 15%, 2%. What's that? That's kind of 45% of the footprint there is just in transport that they are purchasing. So moving goods around is quite a big kind of part of that. So it just gets you to think about all the different parts of your carbon footprint that maybe we're not directly aware of, and it is important to start thinking about if we are Tesco's and we are selling innocent smoothies, well, actually, there's a whole supply chain there that we are purchasing and that we are supporting and that we need to be aware of as part of that net zero strategy. So I think this is why we wanted to look at buy and sell, is that measuring your supply chain carbon footprint is incredibly difficult, and I'm not saying go away and do that. There's a reason why Pukka Teas and Innocent Drinks are the two examples. They are massive corporates that can afford to do that. Don't be overwhelmed with this. I'm not asking for anyone to go and quantify this, but do start to be prepared and start to think about the influence that you have within your local community to adjust and amplify those impacts in a positive way. And just to look into the future and see what's coming and why this is a preparation piece. Well, Scottish Enterprise, great example. They've got quite clear guidance on this in that it's aligned to 2045 in terms of any of their support. So if you're going to Scottish Enterprise for support, you need to have a net zero policy in line with 2045, and you need to have a carbon reduction plan or a net zero plan as part of that. Without that plan, you might not be getting that support. That does include your scopes 1 and 2, so your energy essentially, and that needs to be aligned with a 50% reduction by 2030, but also requires, and this is the key phrase, easily calculated scope 3. So the things that you're buying and selling and the things that you're moving around is going to be part of that requirement to reduce down, and therefore you want to be aware of it. The NHS is another great example. So as of April this year, they're requiring a lot more net zero alignment and a lot more commitment to carbon reduction plans. But the interesting one for me on this timeline is 2028, where they're requiring all products that they are purchasing to have a life cycle analysis with them. Now, this again is incredibly large and is not necessarily directly relevant for organizations on this call, but if you imagine the amount of plastic that the NHS are getting through every day in terms of single-use plastics, they need to quantify that. They need to start understanding the role they have in that, and therefore everything they're buying in is going to need to have part of that carbon footprint so they can start quantifying it as part of their supply chain requirements. So if you are working with or you are supplying into the NHS, this might be something you want to look into more and be aware of. And again, please do post into the comments because I can share some links to where this data came from. Another quick example is Tesco's, and again, a great example of how these supply chains are aligning, because if you look at something like Science Based Targets Initiative, which is a really big corporate standard around net zero, they are starting to increasingly require Tesco's as part of that process to look at their own supply chain. And I would say Tesco's are one of the more ambitious supermarkets around this. They've got loads of great details on the website. An example being, if there's a bread supplier there, they're going to be asked for their carbon footprint, who are then going to turn around and as part of that process look to their logistics supply chain, who then might look to their HR department, who then might look to where they're buying their paper from, who are then going to turn around, and you might be the kind of sixth in the chain in terms of Tesco supply chain, but because of the knock-on effects of carbon reduction plans and carbon footprints, is going to then be part of that. The reason for that is that looking at buy and sell, right? This is the total footprint for Tesco's. 50% of their footprint is in producing the items that they sell. 40% of their footprint is in the things that they buy, is in what customers are buying in. That should be the way around, sorry. So producing the things that they sell. So essentially Tesco's buying the things that they then sell on is 50%, and customers going in and buying those goods are another 40%. So the interesting stat on this for me is that 1.4% of Tesco's entire footprint is in running their stores. It's a relatively low percentage of their total material footprint here, and they're starting to work on how they reduce that down and how they start to understand their influence and their responsibility for those large carbon footprints. So this is all what's coming at quite a large corporate level. So that 90% there is in what they buy and sell. And that's why net zero and buy and sell, I think, is so interlinked and why we need to be really aware of this. This is not the most exciting slide, I appreciate, but bear with me. CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, exciting thing for a Tuesday afternoon, I realise. This is an example of carbon taxes and some of the legislation that's coming down where if you are buying in a lot of materials from abroad, we're starting to see carbon taxation be applied to those. So for example, if you are buying in quite a lot of steel or goods that are made from steel, it might be that if they're produced outside of the EU, that then there is going to be a taxation put on those as they come into the EU. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is the UK are aligning to this in roughly the same timeline as the EU are as well. So the products that you buy in might be taxed, but also the products that you're selling, are they potentially going to be exposed to taxation as well? And therefore, what is coming around this net zero drive and the impacts within your supply chain? So what I wanted to do now, that's all the very big stuff. And I appreciate that's all quite lofty, but I wanted to look a little bit at what we're seeing within Scotland specifically. So as the Climate Confident website, we kind of gather some insights into what's going on across a few hundred organisations. And I'm just going to run through some of the questions we ask here. So in terms of do you choose suppliers with a strong environmental policy? Currently, 30% are saying yes, 44% are saying where possible, which I think is a really interesting one where that is probably is how I'd interpret that is it's organizations that are doing as much as they can, but ultimately they might be a little bit powerless to actually do the full amount, and therefore they're having to do as much as they can, but not everything. Only 25% of organizations, sorry, 25% of organizations are then saying that they do not choose suppliers with strong environmental policies. So again, that's potentially a risk if around net zero, if you do have a strong net zero strategy, you need to be working with suppliers who do have similar alignments. So a question that we'll come to later, but I would start thinking yourself is how many of you are actually checking those environmental policies before you take on a new supplier? Is that a process you've got in place? Is that a process you can put in place? There's quite good guidance from both the Climate Confident website as well as Zero Waste Scotland on some sort of templates and guidance to do that. I think also going beyond just your immediate supply chain is looking at something like a pension fund and go, well, actually, are you driving social or environmental issues that your own organization exists to tackle? If you're heavily invested in something like oil and gas, that is going to, if your pension fund, sorry, is heavily invested in oil and gas, that is potentially going to be undoing good work that you're trying to do if you're an environmental organization. And this might be something that you're just not aware of, and very possibly so because it is quite a complicated thing to tackle. But as we see here, 60% of organizations are saying they do not know if their pension providers offer an ethical fund. This question isn't even, are you using an ethical fund? It's, do they offer one? So I would recommend everyone goes away and looks at their pensions and their organizational pension funds to understand a little bit more about this so you can educate and provide that information on to staff as necessary. The impact here can be quite difficult because pensions are notoriously regulated and therefore you have to be quite careful with what language you use. But I do think that influence piece of are you able to just provide that information to staff to make those changes themselves is something to look at. Similarly, we see with bank accounts, again, a huge carbon footprint with some banks compared to others. So if you go to a website called bank.green, you can start looking up your emissions, kind of the examples of the different accounts you've got, and therefore if they are good or bad. So we see 28% saying they do use ethical bank accounts, 23% where possible, and then another 40%, 49%, 50% saying they do not currently use ethical bank accounts, which again is a huge challenge there in is that driving negative impacts through communities. If we look back to that first slide from the report around transparency and understanding what consumers are looking for is that consumers are looking for transparent information on the products they are buying. Well, do you actually have an environmental sustainability policy? Do you have that transparency there that you can then start engaging with? We see 55% of people do, which is great. It's quite a high percentage, but we also see 43% saying that they do not. That is also quite a large percentage. So do check, is your own house in order? Do you have an easy to find environmental policy on your website? Do you have one on net zero? Do you have a net zero commitment or a date set? Again, Scottish Enterprise, if you're looking for guidance and support, this is starting to come down the line as a requirement that you are aligning to net zero. And I think it's really simple. It's what things have you done? What things are you currently working on? And what projects might you be able to do in the future? I guarantee you've done far more than you think you have. And there's probably stuff you're looking into and working on already around net zero that you aren't demonstrating and things that you can do in the future as well. You know, solar panels might not be possible immediately, but it is something you can look into. 43% is quite a large percentage of people to say that they don't have a policy. And even of that 56% that do, if we ask the question, do you promote that? We get an even smaller percentage. So then it's only 40% of the 55% that do have a policy are actually promoting this. So we see 60% of organizations are basically silent potentially about their policy here. So I would question that. Is it easy to find if a customer or stakeholder wanted to find one to try and contact you about it? What does your website say? Is it easy to navigate to? Just very quickly before I hand over to Matt. So I want to look at kind of leadership and just put this in a bit of context because there does come a point where you can't do any more. There are things that are within your control, but there's also things that you can influence. And that's really what we wanted to focus on today is that influence piece. But then at the top, we've also got things that might be within your concern. And those bits are things that you might want to remove. And so you can focus on just the things that you can control, which is things like, well, maybe turning the lights off that you're using in the office. things like your suppliers that you're using, the things that you're buying in, that is a decision you're making. And within reason, you might be able to control that and use a more ethical or a more environmentally friendly supplier as a result. These are often things that you can do quickly, and some of it might be lifestyle changes as well, such as eating slightly less red meat. It's going to be a great one. There's a whole webinar that we could probably do on just food as a system. But there are options there for you to have an impact on. But really, where you would need to be focusing your efforts on are an influence, and that this is really your superpower. It's your ability to influence other organizations within your immediate vicinity, but also within the system and within your local community to also start taking action on climate and become more confident on that. Most of your emissions are going to be in that scope 3. They're going to be in that influence piece, and therefore you need to be aware of that. I think even something like under that scope 3, something like commuting, so employee commuting or visitor travel come under that. That is not something you can control. You can't force people not to drive like big Range Rovers onto your premises, but it might be that you can influence them through things like having a really good cycle scheme in place, through things like having electric vehicle charging on site, things like choosing events that are near public transport. All of those things do start to influence the choices that you're making, and therefore, if you can't directly control it, you can still do something about it. That's where we become climate confident, and it's not just focusing about reduction, it's about influencing others and having a change beyond just your own organization's impact. Things that are in your concern, I would highly recommend to try and get rid of them, just because they can be quite enabling or disabling, and there is an inertia that brings there. For me personally, this is climate noise. I try not to read too much news about climate change because it's ultimately not helpful. It is just adding to the pile. What I want to do is try and impact organizations more, and how can I understand what works and what they can do, and share those positive stories that we can actually do this. I think, therefore, talking about the things that you have done and that you are doing is really key. You have probably done more than you think, and therefore listing out a list of things that you've done is going to be a great way to do that. Equally, things that you can achieve, make sure what you're doing is achievable and possible, and focus on that. And anything that isn't there, put in that do later column. If you can't influence your landlord to put on solar panels for whatever reason, fine, put that on the list and then move on to something else that you can influence and that you can change. That's it from me for now. I'll be back shortly, but I'm going to hand over to Matt now. I'm going to stop sharing and hopefully we'll have a seamless switch over.
I hope so. Thanks, Adam. I'll share my screen now.
Brilliant. I can see that screen.
Awesome. And you can hear me as well.
I can hear you. Yeah, all good.
Great. Thanks for the invite to speak today. It's appreciated. Yeah, I'm Matt Lewis. I am a membership and policy manager for Circular Communities Scotland, and I'm specifically here to share our example of green public procurement in practice, the Reuse Consortium. So just coming at this from a slightly different angle, but really pleased to share this information with you today. So it's all about the Reuse Consortium. It was launched in 2016, and fundamentally it was created to deliver quality and affordable furniture to local authorities and other public sector organisations to help supply housing in their communities. And that furniture is all reuse furniture. So it's now in its 7th year of operation, and there are 3 main players in the scheme: Circular Communities Scotland, Zero Waste Scotland, and Scotland XL. I work for Circular Communities Scotland. We are the Scottish network for reuse, recycling and repair charities and social enterprises. We've got over 250 members in total up and down Scotland, and we all want to see a thriving circular economy where social, economic and environmental benefits affect everyone. Zero Waste Scotland are important in this regard because they helped us advocate for reuse in public procurement, and initially they provided financial support for us to set up the Reuse Consortium as a project within Circular Communities Scotland, and with the aim of becoming self-sustaining, the project to become self-sustaining in the future. And that took over 3 years, but we're in that place now. It is washing its own face, and I'll tell you how we're doing that in a wee while. The third major player is Scotland Excel. Now, they are the national procurement service for the public sector here in Scotland, and they themselves at the beginning of the journey were very open to how they could be more sustainable and how they could engage better in procurement with social enterprises and charities that want to supply to the public sector. There was a tendering process by ourselves, and our consortium finally became part of the procurement framework, which enabled local authorities to access the framework and buy furniture through our consortium members. It took a long while to set up, time and resources heavy. It was quite a steep learning curve, but we did get there. So, consortium members, who actually are they? I mean, we've got lots of members, as I've said, across Scotland that do reuse and repair and recycling, but we have some quite significant reuse furniture projects who are successful, charities and social enterprises in their own right, but they don't individually have the capacity to tender for contracts themselves or to be on the national framework itself. But by forming the consortium and becoming part of the consortium, each of these members could be then part of that bigger project. Because Circular Community Scotland, we're the contract holder, so we can actually give central support to making sure all of the 9 reuse members on it are doing what they should. So very quickly, yeah, we've got 9 members across Scotland from Dumfries and Galloway up to the Highlands and across the northeast of Scotland, with a few in the central belt. They're all reuse furniture projects, and as individual charities, they're probably turning over between 350k and 1.9 million in annual turnover, maybe with an average turnover between them of 700,000, 800,000. So they are quite significant in their own right. They are, sorry, I'm going backwards. As individual organisations, they do support a range of social causes themselves, whether that's combating poverty, promoting reuse and repair locally, training and employment opportunities, or other services like befriending, mental health support projects, that sort of thing. And the consortium business, the project can contribute to their wider social aims. So that's quite important for them that it does that. Okay, so what does buying from the consortium actually mean? Well, essentially, local authorities purchase the furniture in a variety of ways, because each local authority themselves is different. Depending on which local authority we're speaking about, we might have different departments that we deal with, and that's a complication that I can maybe touch on later. It might be the procurement team, it might be waste services team, it might be the housing team, or it could be the social work team. You've got to find the department which actually is wanting to purchase furniture. And the other thing we've learned as well is dealing with local authorities, finding individuals that actually want to support the project, almost like finding local champions within local authorities and going through them is really beneficial too. It might be a councillor, it might be a senior purchasing manager, it could be an environmental manager. Find a champion through the council and try and work with them. As well as local authorities, I just wanted to mention we actually also supply one housing association, and we've also been involved in a university pilot scheme, which is very interesting, exciting too. In terms of the types of goods, I said they're all reuse items, and it's a variety of white goods. That could be washing machines, fridges, freezers, could be sofas, could be bedroom furniture, beds, mattresses, and dining room furniture as well, a whole range. And each local authority only buys what it wants to buy. Some buy white goods, some don't. It does vary from local authority to local authority. So green procurement, it's definitely green procurement, because by using good quality reuse furniture, there is no need or no requirement to buy new, and that definitely helps planet. both in terms of keeping stuff out of landfill and making furniture last as long as possible. And we also have some measure of the carbon CO2 emission figures as well that the project is helping with. But there are other impacts as well, which are just as important. It helps people in organisations in terms of employability, fulfil their social mission. All of our reuse projects are grounded in a particular place. So again, having a strong reuse project supports local economy too. And financially, it does save pounds for the local authority as well. It is true that good quality reuse furniture can enable a budget to go further. So that's important. I just wanted to quickly maybe mention quality. All of the reuse projects involved in the consortium have a quality assurance standard through the Scottish Revolve scheme. Some of you might have heard of that. Essentially, furniture they repair and pass for reuse is measured and comes up to the Revolve certification scheme. And that's a really important demonstration to local authorities that they're actually buying good quality reuse. And in some respects, it's actually better quality than some of the new furniture that can be quite cheap and problematic in some cases. So how does the consortium actually work? Well, I'm actually not the consortium coordinator. We have in place a part-time reuse consortium coordinator, and their job is specifically to support the reuse consortium members and liaise with the local authorities buying furniture or those wanting to buy furniture. I said the consortium washes its face, so we take a percentage of monthly trading from the members, which then goes to pay for our part-time reuse coordinator. So that's what I mean. It does wash its own face, which is great. So if you're part of the consortium, you access all of the systems that we've set up. There's a bespoke ordering system that we created. It's easy to operate, has the ability to track individual orders, provide invoices and pull off important statistics, both for the reuse members and the local authorities, because data is important. The other thing we also do, and the coordinator does, is identify potential new members that could supply reuse furniture as well in other areas, and potential local authority new buyers too. And sometimes running a pilot project in a new area is the way to go. Sometimes there can be a challenge of there may well be a reuse furniture project in a particular area who is able to supply furniture. We then follow up with the local authority to see if they're interested. Sometimes they come back and say it doesn't work for them at this time. It's a real selling point sometimes that it takes time to engage with them. Sometimes it's about capacity issues. Sometimes it's about, oh no, we don't want to change the way we actually buy furniture. It might be a specific person that is a barrier. So it's actually really sometimes quite time consuming to win hearts and minds of local authority buyers. So that's important if you are looking to trade with a local authority to win their hearts and minds. I said data is important. We produce quarterly reports, and this gives you a nice idea of what we do. Now, people, planet, place and pounds is a really good way of showing impact, and local authorities really like this data. And in fact, we also create these quarterly reports for each local authority engaging with us, so they can actually see the impact in their local authority area across how many people have been served, how many items of furniture have been reused, how much waste has been diverted from landfill by using reuse, CO2 tonnage figures, the value of those purchases, which is incredibly significant, local jobs maintained, and the last one, which is the approximate budget saving over buying new, which is very important to local authorities. So that's our report. There are, I've mentioned a couple of challenges. I quickly mentioned a couple of challenges. Geography is a challenge. Some parts of Scotland are just expensive to try and service, the Highlands and Islands, for example. Just the increased costs of servicing that. We only cover some of the Highlands in terms of in and around Inverness. It would be really difficult to cover all of the Highlands, and also some of the islands where there actually isn't a social enterprise or charity in that area able to service the local authority. Supply, there are issues of supply in terms of reuse. There'll be no surprise to you that with a cost of living crisis that we all face, many people are holding on to their items and donating not as much to the local charities or social enterprises. So the supply of reuse items can be limiting. And sometimes there are systems challenges in that the local authority doesn't want to engage with our ordering system and wants us to use their system, and that can cause challenges too. But there are plenty of opportunities. Training opportunities is a big one. The training of engineers to pack test white goods and the servicing and installation of machines, that's quite a big one in terms of training opportunities for employability. Community benefits, plenty of local community benefits that the council can buy into as well. And reciprocal arrangements, that it's not just about providing furniture. If a local authority then connects with a social enterprise, it might have other services and benefits. You know, it could provide food packs or other items that the social enterprise can support its clients with. So that works really well as well. But we think one of the big opportunities is it gives a level of individuality and respect to clients of local authorities, rather than just getting a standard beige council sofa. They actually can help be helped to choose their own furniture and items, which is really quite powerful. And the relationships, as I said, between local social enterprises and charities and local authorities is really key too. So what do people say about the project? A couple of quotes from a couple of councils that buy from us. One of them, in Fife Council, they mention the carbon footprint impact. It's important to them. And Aberdeenshire Council mentioning a very important point: second-hand really doesn't mean poor quality. The Revolve standard makes sure these items are built and repaired well and will last. And just from a consortium member themselves, it is a partnership, and it's the member that was working with housing associations. We help them turn housing into homes. That's so important and such a great point. In terms of the future, we would love more local authorities to come on board. We would love more reuse members across Scotland to also come on board and join. We would love to see the reuse furniture consortium be provided as standard across every local authority of Scotland. We know we've got a long way to go in that regard, but we are getting there. I think that's all I wanted to say today. There's some contact details there for Rhoda, our consortium coordinator, and on the Reuse Consortium website, there's a lot of detail about what the consortium does. But I'm delighted to answer any questions that you might have for me this afternoon. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Matt. I think that's really, really insightful. I think really demonstrates what we're saying about. I really liked what you said about the kind of the furniture being reused, being higher quality. It's something that we see quite a lot, that actually that refurbished, that remanufacturing of these items can actually be a much more positive benefit. It doesn't need to be a sacrifice, but it's also, as you say, has that quantifiable carbon reduction impacts and carbon footprints as well. So that's always my main takeaway whenever I speak to anyone that's doing circular stuff, is that it's actually a really positive, good way of doing it. Does anyone have any questions on that for Matt? Just going to change it so I can see people's faces. Everyone's looking very pensive. Cool. Feel free, if you did want to ask any questions, either of myself or Matt in that section, please do just raise your hand. If everyone's happy to, what I was going to do is just ask a question, really. What I'm really keen to understand is your experience and go, actually, this has all been very good. And I think, I've given a lot of theory there. Matt's given some really good practical examples of what that looks like on the ground. But what about you guys? Like, have you engaged with any of the suppliers? Are you willing to share the experience of that you may have had with your suppliers or anyone in your kind of industry or sector really around net zero? And what was that response? Does anyone have any feedback they'd like to raise? Yes, Baz.
Depends on the size of the supplier you're dealing with. I've tried to get as much information as I can from all the people that we commonly sort of, procure services and materials from. And the larger companies have all the information you need available. The smaller companies will have all the information you need available because there's only 3 of them and they all know it and they can tell you.
Yeah.
It's the middle-sized organizations where you get a guy on the phone going,
yeah,
like that for a bit. So they need a bit of guiding, a little bit of help,
a bit of supporting,
a bit of supporting through this difficult process.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
What is your? Sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, go on.
I was going to ask what your organization was, or what kind of. What was the
I'm the technology manager for Drake Music Scotland. So we do accessible technology. So I talk to both Apple and nerds in an office, taking things apart. So it's a little bit of both there.
Brilliant. And is that where you're asking for like the provenance of certain technologies that you're trying to understand more about?
Yes, exactly. Is it carbon wise? Is it, for instance, better for me to? We use iPads a lot because they are incredibly accessible. Is it better for me to buy them straight from Apple, or is it environmentally more sound to go to a UK-based reseller? Things like that. Now, from Apple, I can find out all the things about Apple, but to go to the reseller and to try and find out that information is tricky sometimes.
I can imagine, especially if you're going to then, like, as you say, a passionate nerd somewhere who's refurbishing them and has all that data and is like fully clued up.
Well, if it's like there's a couple of people who are like making custom things and they are just like 3 or 4 people in an office, and they do know because they have a guy who goes out in his car and gets the stuff and comes back and puts it all together. But if there is a couple of layers separate between the people getting the products in and the people communicating to the rest, then that becomes sometimes incredibly difficult.
Nice.
So there's a hell of a lot of guesswork, is what I'm saying, in the middle of the bits.
Yeah.
In the middle of the road.
It's a journey. So yeah, we'll go with road. It's good. It's good terminology. It's fine. Yes. It's all a journey. Sean, I see you're nodding there. Is there anything you wanted to add to that? I'm going to pick on you slightly. Apologies, but
not particularly. Just acknowledging that. Yeah, I think we've found that too in our organisation, that it can be very hit and miss, depending on the size of the organisation and again the background of that organisation. But I guess it's trying to, for us, we've got a bit more flexibility often to be able to look at more local kind of supply chains, not for everything, but I think we struggle with the practical application and just kind of keeping on top of that, assessing new supplies and new suppliers. So we've got the stuff at policy level, but it's then that ongoing kind of responsibility of somebody within the organisation when we're all really busy doing the day-to-day stuff to take that kind of overall responsibility. Or does it have to be? Is that how do people kind of manage that? How do they manage their kind of supplier policy stuff day to day when they've got they haven't got, you know, a sustainability manager, or they haven't got a sustainability team. You know, I'd be quite interested to see how people kind of just manage that, whether it is purely just volunteers within their organizations that are passionate and just move it forward. I know with the first course, the first of these sessions, we talked about a team, didn't we? The green team within the organization, a volunteer green team. So that's obviously given me lots of food for thought for us.
I think it is like baking it into all those small decisions, because I remember just as one very quick example that I will come to you, Matt. I used to work in a small kind of e-commerce business that was selling. There's about 10 people in the team. We were constantly selling stuff online. This is sort of 8 years ago, but I was responsible for buying in packaging. So that was the piece of just empowering me to go, well, do I buy the, you know, the bad packaging or the good packaging, and just understanding that it's as small as that. Because as you say, because I'm doing the day-to-day, I'm just running to the nearest supplier and hitting that buy button to get the items in. So how do you bake it into that? I think it's a really interesting question. And I don't think it's an easy one to say, well, here's a blog post on it, done. You know, it is a bit more of, it depends on the team, etc. Matt, sorry, coming over to you. Thanks very much, Sean, for being picked on as well.
Thank you. Yeah, no, there was just so when my first point was when Baz was speaking about IT and repair. It's not what I was here to speak about today, but I could throw out that there are some really good emerging reuse sort of repair projects, social enterprise repair projects across Scotland, and we would love to see repair join reuse and become mainstream. But we're miles away from that. But further than that, we're not in Europe anymore in terms of the EU. The EU just passed some right to repair legislation. Wouldn't that be amazing to have here in Scotland or in the UK? So
here.
We need to be aiming for that. You know, it should be up to us as consumers. We should have the choice and the opportunity of either repairing our own stuff or given the tools are other people locally to help us repair our own stuff. That was the repair side of things. And then, Sean, when we were talking about, private companies, some of them being better than others, fascinating. We, as a central network, we sometimes get larger private companies come to us. And it's sometimes the sustainability coordinator or the circular economy coordinator saying, oh, we've got a warehouse full of stuff. I've been tasked to do something to do with it. I'm not allowed to throw it to landfill. Do you want it? Now we can help maybe reallocate and relocate some of those items, but we're not really noticing the small or the medium-sized organizations. It's the big ones because they've got the big sustainability coordinators. So there's a disconnect there of bringing small and medium-sized companies to the conversation around this. That was just those two themes I wanted to add, Adam.
No, I appreciate that. I think that both really key. I think that connecting the dots is really the challenge here, because I think this is what I was trying to demonstrate with that Tesco slide, is that it's sort of a bad example because they're so big, but if someone like them who's got this problem of 90% of their footprint is in the things they're buying and selling, we're going to need a systems level shift to address that in terms of them buying even their tech equipment from refurbished sources. And I think IT is where we're seeing a lot of this come through. And sadly, they weren't based in Scotland. They're based down on the south coast. I think they're like Portsmouth, but they did a lot of IT remanufacturing, where the laptops they were taking in and remanufacturing were coming out as a higher quality because they went through a verifiable 10-step process, which meant that it was taken apart, it was cleaned, it was rebuilt, and it was really solid, which then puts them ahead of going into a contract like Tesco's to go, well, actually, not only are we lower carbon, but we're also as good, if not better quality than you know buying something new, because we've got certificates and we've done the work. And because we're a small team, we can verify the work that's been done. So I think we're starting to see this come through of the opportunity and ambition here, and that this is such a big problem. Therefore, it's a massive opportunity, and everyone's going to have this, no matter what the size of your organization is. It was a bit of a soapbox moment. Apologies. I think circular economy, now I've got my head around it, is really exciting. Which I didn't quite understand it a couple of years ago. Were there any other questions or challenges that people wanted to share that we could try and pull some examples of? I saw, Meg, yeah, great shout on the dual lit refurbished toasters. I think things like that, it's like, it's a toaster, it's, you know, how hard can it be to that to be brand spanking new? Yeah, any other questions? Just before we wrap up. Please raise your hand if so in the next 30 seconds. Cool. What I'll do now is there's just a few slides to go before we kind of wrap up here. I think the main takeaway or the main message I would like to kind of share with you all is just start asking questions. It is the most powerful thing you can do. And I think just asking, what is your sustainability policy? What is your environmental policy? The next time you go to buy something from somewhere, whether that's through your organization or whether that's personally, that is the level of power that you have. And just asking that question really does help start changing and addressing this challenge. There's a great example I saw of, who was it? I can't remember the company. Basically, they had a really encouraging recruitment system where they had loads of graduates coming through. And the reason they started partnering up with a environmental consultancy to measure their footprint and build a reduction plan and sign up to like science-based targets and ambitious stuff was because people who weren't even employed by the company yet were asking in interview stage, what is your environmental policy? And therefore, they weren't even customers. They didn't have any requirements. It wasn't the stakeholders. It wasn't the senior leadership team. It was just people who were attending interviews who were asking that caused the senior leadership team to then go on and spend probably tens of thousands of pounds with an organization to change it. So do not underestimate the power of asking a question. These little things, all those small nudges really do add up to a bit of a sea change. And that's the main thing with this. So just in terms of finishing off, I've got a couple of slides before 3 o'clock. There we are. So please do make sure you measure your footprint. There's some great examples and some great tips that you get as part of doing the scorecard. There is a link into the chat. There'll be a follow-up email as well. So please do take that. The scorecard's really simple to use. It takes about 3 minutes, 4 minutes to complete. So yeah, please do go and do that. As I mentioned earlier, storytelling is the biggest challenge here. Please do share your stories and submit your stories to the website. There's a great resource there. You'll get good coverage. You'll get invited to feature on sessions like these if you would like to. But it's a really great way to get your message out there and to raise your awareness, raise your profile, and kind of look good in the sector. So please do submit a story, obviously completely free. It's also very simple. It's a paragraph, so it will take 10 minutes while you're making a cup of tea. It does not need to be difficult. Further support. So there is going to be further net zero guidance support coming. What that looks like, we don't know just yet, but there is an email on the website, so please do go and sign up there. As mentioned, this is all coming through in partnership with Just Enterprise, who have got a bunch of resources available. There is going to be more net zero stuff coming as well. And we normally have a slide at the end here for the next webinar, but we don't today because this is the last one. So I will stop sharing my screen again. We should have had a better slide there. Apologies, everybody. But please, there you go. There's links into the chat now for the follow-on steps. The main thing is please do just keep dialogue open. If you've got a challenge with net zero, email us, contact us. We'll be able to help you and support you with further resources. Is there anything anyone wanted to say just before we wrap up? Anything I've missed? Because I always end up missing things on these. There's no hands being thrown up to tell me that I've forgotten something. So we'll give you 2 minutes of your day back. Isn't that exciting on a Tuesday afternoon? Quite cold sunlight for a few seconds and absorb it. Oh, feedback form. Yes, there's a link which goes to the chat about a feedback form. Please do fill that out because it helps us inform these.
Thanks everyone for joining us, and yeah, we'll be in touch with future events.
Cool. Speak to you soon. Thank you, Matt.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Good.